What do you treasure in life? Maybe your response would be family, friends, or your relationship with God. Well, here's a way you can test if you really mean what you say. Take a look at your calendar and your credit card statement. Do they reflect what you just said? Maybe the old saying, put your money where your mouth is more accurate than we realize. In Matthew 6:19-21, we hear Jesus' words in his famous Sermon on the Mount. He said to us, don't store up treasure here on earth where moths eat them and rust destroys them and where thieves break in and steal. Store your treasures in heaven where moths and rust cannot destroy and thieves do not break in and steal. Wherever your treasure is, there are the desires of your heart will also be. Well, the big question from the Sermon on the Mount is the question of, where's your heart? Well, according to Jesus, it can be found wherever your treasure is. Interesting, right? So what do you treasure? Are you preoccupied with stuff, either having it or not having it? Both can be a preoccupation. Is climbing the ladder of success or building your financial portfolio always on your mind? Does the thought of heaven actually bore you? Jesus uses 3 tests to show us how the things we treasure most are only temporary. He uses the moth, rust, and the thief. So what about that moth? It's a tiny little butterfly-looking animal and it appears to be sweet and innocent, but it gets in your clothes and it can eat right through them. And rust, well, living in Canada, we know all about this. With all the salt that's put on our roads in the winter, it can turn a shiny, clean car into a rust bucket in no time if we're not careful. And then there's that thief. From hidden cameras, alarm systems, and secure safes, we do everything to protect our stuff for fear of someone taking it. And what does that thief do? He breaks in and he takes people's personal treasures. So what do you really treasure? If it doesn't pass the moth, rust, and thief test, then it might not be the right kind of treasure. Here, Jesus is calling us to change our minds from the temporary to the eternal, from things that are passing by to things that are permanent. You never see a hearse pulling a U-Haul trailer. Things are only temporary. In contrast, Jesus says in Matthew 6:20, store your treasures in heaven where moths and rust can't destroy and thieves do not break in and steal. Here, Jesus is talking about laying up eternal treasures that do not fade away. What are those treasures? Well, Jesus talks about it in 1 Peter 1:3-4, and it says, because God raised Jesus from the dead, now we live with great expectation, and we have a priceless inheritance, an inheritance that is kept in heaven for you, pure and undefiled, beyond the reach of change and, catch it, decay. As believers, our inheritance is waiting for us in eternity. Being with Christ, that is our reward. So the real question is, where's your heart? Wherever your treasure is, there the desires of your heart will also be. So we need to examine our hearts. What do we desire most? What do we think about most? Where do we spend our time and our money? We need to be storing up our treasures in heaven where there are no moths, no rust, and no thieves. So let's pull out our calendars and our credit card statements and do a heart check, because that's courageous living.